at Landmark, okay? You remember, young man, he was basically told, you go do this. By the way, I got all over that competent person, you remember? Because this kid was doing exactly what he was directed or basically ordered to do. He even brought up to his super, not one of our guys, but one of the subcontractors, hey boss, I don't have all the right stuff to do that. And the competent person basically said, and you to do it anyway. At that point, is that a criminal act? Yes, absolutely. So that's what I want you guys to, one, recognize. At that point, when that competent person was told, hey boss, I don't have all that information, okay, I don't have all the right tools, I can't do this right, and that person came back with, do it anyway, that act right there is what you get them for. In this case, this person was using a forklift and was what we call free rigging. Anyone know what free rigging means?
Well, you just attach,
on the fork.
just attach at any point. Just, you just find a point and you throw a sling or choker or whatever.
Here's your forks, right, on your forklift, and you just take that sling and you just slide them right on there, baby. That's free rigging. That's not allowed. Okay, that's not appropriate rigging ever. Okay, there is no spec sheet that allows you to do that. So not only is it against Turner policy, of course, but it's actually against the manufacturer specs of the crane, I'm sorry, of the forklift. Okay, so that's one of the changes. Other than that, all of this stuff is also in here. The other thing that I think is really important is pile drivers. So this is where you're going to find that regulation for driving piles. Okay, so people don't think of it in cranes. This is where it is. By the way, when you're doing piles, what else do you tend to have with you? A crane. You tend to have the crane with the drill rig right there. They tend to go together. Okay. These are also cranes, okay, or davits. Okay. These pictures were all from the library, actually. So the machine on the right was what they were using. It's a crane to lift those large pieces of glass that weighed 1,000 pounds almost. They were what, 800, 900 pounds pieces of glass. So when you see something like that come on your site, flags need to go off. And you need to go, that is a crane. Not only do you need crane training for that piece of equipment, no, you do not need to be a full-fledged crane operator, but you need to have operator training per the manufacturer requirements for that piece of equipment. If you're rigging, you're the person that's physically putting rigging on that hook or around, in this case, the windows, the glazing, you have to be a qualified rigger. Card-carrying, trained rigger. Okay? There's another setup of, here's a very simple one. Look at this. This was used by our sheet metal guys. Okay? So 2 different trades, 2 different types of pieces of equipment, both cranes. Look, this almost looks like it's like a little tiny dolly, okay, with some kind of a crane attached to it. Yet this has to have a serial number, and it has to be configured in a very specific way. It has to have an operator's manual that goes with it. It has to have training. There's all kinds of requirements for this. So when you see these pieces of equipment come out, flags can go off. The other thing that I think sometimes people overlook or don't overlook is the trench plate delivery cranes that come out, okay, that have the little crane rig on the back of the truck to bring. Those are cranes. Let's not forget about it. They have to follow all those same regulations. Okay. Assembly and disassembly. These were the changes. Okay. They must have manufacturer procedures or employee procedures. So in other words, they have to have explicit plans. That's not a bad thing. That's a really great thing. We want to know how you're putting this thing up. Okay. They have to have general requirements. They need to have a assembly, disassembly director. That is their title. That person must be a competent and qualified person. What's the difference between a competent and a qualified person by regulation?
A competent person is designated by the employer, or a qualified person has training either through a certified place or university or something.
They have a credential. They have an actual credential. They have an engineering stamp. They have an operator's card. They have proof. So remember that you have a competent person. By regulation, a competent person has the skills, knowledge, authority to stop and start work, and the skills, knowledge, and resources of that authority. A qualified person has the technical knowledge to be considered a qualified person for that task. Okay, two different things. The director of this particular process needs to have both. Okay. That director must understand these procedures, review processes, and then check that their crew knows what they're doing. What do we call that process right there? What do we require from every subcontractor for every task that they do? A JHA. You're connecting the dots. That's exactly what we call this. This is a JHA, job hazard analysis. Now we do daily pre-task plans also. Okay, so if you start thinking about this, this is the big, what are we doing? What is this crew doing? What am I doing today? Okay. Follow manufacturers' prohibitions. Okay. What can they not do? That's what that's about. All rigging must be done by a qualified rigger. That was a big change in this regulation. A qualified rigger. By the way, does an operator automatically meet the requirements of a rigger? No. Okay, so you got to remember those things. When using outriggers, fully extended or deployed per the load chart. So you'll hear me talk about load charting all the time, configuration charts. What's Turner's policy on short rigging of cranes? We don't allow them. What's Turner's policy on short rigging of concrete pumps? I'm the only one that can actually say this. Okay, we're not allowed. Short rigging. Short rigging is when you have a crane, okay, and you have the outriggers that come out on the sides. Okay, so if you have a pump or a crane, short rigging means it actually is supposed to come out this far,
So they're not fully extended.
and you only extend it that far. Exactly. Precisely.
Why would you do that? Just that you can't fit
Space.
in?
Space, traffic control, limitation. There's all kinds of reasons that they'll do that. Okay. At the library, when we had that incident, it was a traffic control limitation. It was a space limitation. Yeah, so that's what it was. Qualified signal persons. See? Okay. Get the lane closure. That's what I say now. That's my whole thing. Hand, voice, audible. Okay. So you have to define how are you doing signals. One of the things they're doing at Sempra, and it's funny because I haven't made up my mind on this yet. Okay. You haven't either. That's funny. The iron workers at Sempra. Do you want to explain what they're doing, Andres?
Yeah, their procedures, this is our steel contractor, they have a wired, basically radio. And so, walkie-talkie radio, what they do is, their thinking behind this is that it's safer because they have a hard connection and there's no delay and it's a better connection. So every crane has a hardwired connection coming down. So imagine, you know, a digital string and can. And that's the way that they do it. So you have a guy out there who's rolling up his cord and walking out and then rolls it back, and everybody helps. You know, they make sure that it doesn't get tangled, doesn't get cut. But yeah, you see a guy like stringing out cord as he's walking out, giving signals, and then picks it back up as he's walking back and forth. So it's
Like
like,
the old football days, you know, you got a guy
Yeah.
calling the coach with the
so that's,
cord.
That comes from the aviation industry. They, you know, when they taxi planes in with the tights, it's a hard wire, it's not a radio.
so hard radio.
Yeah. So, you know, it's funny that neither Andres or I have made up our minds on whether we love this or don't. I love the fact that I think the communication is clearer between those two individuals. I don't love that I think it creates hazards all over the rest of the site. Okay, so it's a love-hate relationship at this point in time. But the walkie-talkies are a love-hate relationship too. You know, there's pros and cons to every side of it. But now you have to determine whether you're using audible measures or hand and arm signals, okay? Or a combination of both. It has to be agreed upon. Okay? The signal person, when required, needs to be in view of the operators. If you're doing any blind picks, what's a blind pick? They can't see. The crane operator can't see the rigger, vice versa, okay? Think of it that way. You guys ever see in the back of these big trucks and stuff that say, if you can't see my Mura, I can't see you? That's what I think about when I think of blind picks. It's the same concept. Okay? They have no idea where this person is, and just they're flying in some piece of something, equipment. What are we doing? How are we doing that? How are we protecting that whole process from beginning to end? The qualification requirements for a signal person, they need to know and understand the signals. They need to be confident using those signals. So they can't just do it one time. They actually have to be familiar with it. They have to have a basic understanding of crane operation. How does the crane work? Okay? What's important about it? What could be critical to that crane? And they need to pass a verbal written test. Okay? So now it's become much more important. The other thing, see that little note underneath there? This is what gets people all the time in this industry. I have to say that the industry that I think does really well with this is our iron workers because of Local 229. Okay? They get their training from the local, which is considered a third party. Okay? Employers qualified is not portable. What that means is that if you were trained from, I'm just going to use the example, say JR Concrete, and JR Concrete teaches you the class to become a qualified signal person, and now you leave JR and you go to Morley. So now I'm a Morley person over here. I am no longer a qualified signal person. I've lost that credential. Okay? I would now need to be trained by Morley. If, however, I'm that same JR carpenter getting trained as a signal person, and I'm trained by the Carpenters Union, and now I go to Morley, that training does carry over with me. You guys get that? Understand? Okay. I wanted to make sure that was clear, because that gets some people when we are doing that. Here's those hand and arm signals. Okay. All right. Qualified rigger. Qualified rigger has a lot of responsibility now. They also can be criminally responsible for their actions or lack thereof. This stuff, like you see that nylon right there, when you see stuff like that, that's a flag. It also tells you that that rigger's not doing their inspections and not doing their job right. You'll see that we have rigger stickers, hard hat stickers, and of course we have our competent person stickers. So those are things that we should be seeing out there. The rigger, it adds a requirement that employers must designate the rigger. Okay, the rigger must be used for assembly and disassembly. Let's see. And that written inspections are required. Okay, so they have to actually inspect their rigging every day. I took a picture not too long ago at 9th and Broadway when we were dismantling our tower crane. And I have to say I was thoroughly impressed with the riggers. I was not thoroughly impressed with the supervisor, but I was thoroughly impressed with the riggers. Okay, it's fine. Love that the riggers did a great job. They lined out everything, inspected it, it was visible. You could see it. I didn't have to get on them, anything. They showed me that they were doing their job and doing it the right way. It was beautiful. This is all bad rigging. By the way, this is all bad rigging that I personally have pulled off these sites. So there's a double nylon continuous loop sling. Okay. Whenever you see the spaghetti fibers, the red one, I'm talking about the upper left photo, when you see those spaghetti fibers that are inside, you actually see that inner liner. It should be taken out of service. Okay, you should never see that white. The upper right photo, okay, is a wire rope. What is it missing? Anyone tell me? The tag. You can see the little loop where the tag once was in the middle, but now you see that there's no tag. Can you, well, let me put it this way. The iron workers will consistently say, but you know the rating of this, okay? It's got a stamp. Is that acceptable? Or does it have to have the tag on it? It has to have the tag on it, okay? That's the requirement by regulation, has to have the tag on it. They'll try all day long to talk you out of that, okay? But it has to have the tag. The bottom photo, that is called bird caging. So if you've ever heard of the term wire rope bird caging, that's a great picture of what it looks like. What that means when these cables start separating like this down here is that it's lost its structural engineering capacity. It no longer can be rated at what it was originally rated at. There's no way to downgrade that for us. We don't have the knowledge or skills to do a downgrade of any of that item out here. Anyone have a rigging story? A story with rigging? We do, come on. We have a rigging story at the library. You guys have got to remember what fell from right here that changed how we rig.
Was it the porta potty? Yeah. Porta potty's rigging wasn't correct, I guess. It wasn't engineered. They just had something you pick it up from.
So what Brett's talking about is how many of us have seen the blue boxes, the beautiful diamond porta potties or whomever, and it just has the piece of rebar or coil that comes up and it turns like this and it goes back down and it's just into the plastic on the bottom, right? All right, that's exactly what it is. And then we put another little metal hook on the top and that's what we hook to our tower crane, right? We've been using it like this for years. Well, at the library, one time we had just cleaned them. Thank God they were clean. All right, these are blessings, okay? And we had two hooked up, okay, flying in pairs. Okay, actually had two in the hand wash station, so we fly all three at the same time. Well, one of those metal bars broke, and the porta potty went to the ground. It luckily was right here at that point in time. It could have been a much worse situation, okay? So I really looked into that and decided that, you know what? Why have I never thought that a porta potty needed real rigging? It's rigging. We're hooking this up to a crane. We're flying it hundreds of feet up in the air. So had to do a whole shutdown of craneable porta potties, and we had to get engineered, rigged porta potty. Can I tell you what that took to get that out of these porta potty companies now? Okay, but we've got it, and they now recognize that it's rigging and that we need to have appropriately rigged porta potties. So
I was working on an oil rig in Texas, and we had the guy that was, he was rigging up the porta potties up onto the rig, and he like checked them all. And then as he like came around the corner, somebody else came and went in one, and he flew them up
oh god.
onto the rig in the porta potty. So you can imagine.
So there was a person in the porta potty.
inside the porta potty, up like probably.
Imagine how that
200
person
feet.
felt at that
Well, at
point.
least he was in the right place
He
for
was
how scared he
yeah,
was.
you're right. Yeah. Guaranteed he was.
I bet he was like, oh my goodness.
Imagine if we would have freaked out, opened the door, and I
Yeah.
was already like 10 feet up in the air.
And our policy was just that the guy would inspect, you know, each one, because we pick them up in groups of 6,
Yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
and they had, you know,
So by the time he got
by the time
around,
around the corner, somebody just came.
someone
and
had
got it.
already gone in the other ones.
Yeah.
And we always fly them in 2 porta potties and a wash station together, so that tends to be what we always do and have done on our projects. But I can see where that happens. More information on qualified, competent person riggers. They must have the ability to properly rig the load themselves. So they must be able to answer the questions of what is the rated capacity for the entire rigging from beginning to end. It doesn't mean that every rigger has the knowledge, the skills, and the understanding to rig every load. A rigger now, by regulation, has the authority and the right to say, I don't have enough information to rig this. I can't do it. And if a rigger says that, we, as the GC, need to recognize that and say, you know what, this guy doesn't have it. Okay, if he's saying or she's saying that they don't have that skills and knowledge, they don't. And we aren't here to push them into saying, yes, you do. Okay. That's where employers must make sure the person can do the rigging work needed for the exact type of loads, okay? A certified operator does not necessarily meet the requirement as a qualified rigger. It's amazing, because every operator thinks they're a rigger. Yes, they do, they do, they do, they think they're riggers. So unless they have a rigger card, that's a no-go. The picture over here, by the way, is a picture of the library project, and this is not uncommon rigging. Okay, so again, it's all engineered, but that rigger needs to be able to tell me the strength of all of those shackles and all of those pulley systems and everything the whole way up. They have to be able to explain that mathematically. Ground conditions, this is what I was talking about earlier. Provide adequate conditions, firm, drained, and graded, sufficient to support the crane. The controlling entity must inform the equipment user and operator of known underground hazards and voids. Who's the controlling entity? Us. The GC is the controlling entity. We control the entire site. So that means we are responsible for making sure things like this outrigger that punched through this sidewalk here doesn't happen, that we know what's underneath and under the ground. And anyone have a story about anything like that? No? Inspection changes, they have to be documented, that's the biggest thing, and that now there's a pre-erection inspection for tower cranes. It adds that requirement. That was the only real big change in inspections. Now this is who can actually inspect the crane at each one of these different times. Clearances, we talked about electrical, okay? Again, that's a picture of the library project right there. So overhead power lines, look how close we are, okay? They're right there, okay? So what do you have to do if you're within so many feet of so much voltage, okay? How does that work? You have to actually talk to who owns those lines and find out what to do about it, really is what needs to happen at this point in time. Okay? Reference material. Boy, there's a ton of reference material. Now you have it all on your SharePoint drive. So it's all right there, readily available to you. And I think that's it for this. Anyone else have a crane story? Who else has a crane story? I'm supposed to make sure everyone gets an opportunity to discuss their crane story.
Can I just add, we do a lot of work now in airports. We're sitting at an airport. A lot of our backlog is aviation work. And, you know, Dan can talk to this. Is Dan still here?
I was going to step outside.
Well, once you set foot on an airport, Dave, you started at Landmark, you know all about this. There's a whole other set of rules that you got to be cognizant of. And even if something as simple, we just had an incident up at LAX at the Qantas project, the hydraulic crane. There's an FAA permit to operate that crane. We had to get one for Landmark. And
We got one for OTI as well.
our guys are very good. They followed all the regs, but you got to read the FAA permit because that limits even further what you can do for that crane, for that site, for that operation. And you know, we had a violation up there, so just another thing you guys should be aware of as we do more aviation work.
That's really, that comes into play within 5 miles of an airfield.
Yeah.
You don't actually have to be on the airfield, you gotta have 70%.
So it's just an easy place to get tripped up.
Some of the quick things I wanted to hit on, this is that Liberty Mutual presentation so that you know where I'm at on the SharePoint drive. And I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but I think some of the photos are kind of different, unique. One of the things that I'm a pretty good stickler on sometimes is if you look at this operation, so here, what this looks to me is they're on a flatbed, okay? So now that's got to be up here, okay? As they start getting higher and higher in height, you need to start looking at that fall protection requirement for these folks right here, okay? First of all, what's wrong with this guy? Okay, you know, some things, okay.
Missing a few things.
They're missing a few things, but this isn't a Turner presentation, this is a Liberty Mutual presentation, so they don't look at it the way we look at it. But anytime you're mixing rigging, like they're doing here, okay, I would want to know the engineering on these points of these plates. So this is the type of stuff, pre-planning wise, that I'm actually looking for in submittals from our subs. All right. you wanna put this, whatever this might be, precast wall, cover of an electrical vault. What is this point rated to? Then I need the engineering for that shackle, this nylon, to this shackle, to this nylon, and it all has to be configured and mathematically put together, okay? So that's part of what we call a rigging plan. So you have a crane plan, and then you have a rigging plan, two different things, okay? That rigging plan is something that the crane operator is also going to be very interested in seeing. And why? They're ultimately responsible for everything that goes on with that crane.
You don't have a picture I sent you of the guy riding the ball, do you?
No, oh, that would have been a great one, okay? Let's see here. Right here, here's a picture of an impact from an environmental condition. Okay, so look at this track crane right here. Is that an ideal condition for this crane? I wouldn't want to be running it, okay? And then look at this. What happened here? It punched through about 2 inches right there down in the ground. They didn't even have any dunnage underneath there, no less a plate. Okay, so this is where us knowing what needs to be put in place is really important. Let's see. Repetitive lifts. Has everyone here seen that video of Big Blue? Okay. The big crane that was lifting part of the stadium roof a number of years ago? And the wind was howling, is what it was. This enormous crane, like the one that lifted the 4 cranes, okay, came down and also took down 2 other cranes, 2 man baskets full of people. Okay. The moral of this particular story was that that crane did have the capacity to lift that. It was very similar to almost what's being lifted here. It was much larger, but very similar. Okay. This roof structure, okay. But with the winds that were present that day, it did not. It changed the load factor. That was not taken into consideration completely. I can tell you that they were behind schedule at that point in time, and they were paying through the nose, or planning to pay through the nose on LDs, okay? So the decision was made to move ahead, and that decision ended up being a really bad one. So the math and the engineering doesn't lie. They are safety factors for a reason, okay? So that's the thing that we really want to look at.
Christine, you know how high the winds were? I mean, was it something over 35 miles an hour, or?
They were gusting over 35, but they were not constant over 35. But you have to remember what they were lifting and where they are. The other thing that I can't answer to you is whether the winds were measured aloft or on the ground. Okay, so you always have to look at that. Your rating, your reading is going to be different, even in that case, of where the crane is sitting with the massive crane that it was and where that load actually was. Okay, so remember, things when they're in the air and air catches them, the wind, it's like a sail. It's amazing how they will move and how much weight and tension that adds to any crane. Okay? Most of the cranes now, especially the hydraulics, when you see a hydraulic coming out, these cranes are very, very sophisticated. They have true computer systems inside of them. If you look at the controls, it's amazing. It looks like a big iPad, okay, that's all touch screen and everything now, okay? It can tell them, the operator, exactly what their calculations are at now. The old adage of flying from the seat of your pants, okay, the old school operators that say, I know, I can feel it. In the new hydraulic cranes, you can't feel a thing, okay? I think in the old school cranes, some of the older models, that might be the case, but these new hydraulic cranes are engineered and built differently. I'll just put it that way. I don't know how to explain it any differently. So, lift plan development, okay, is huge. Lift meetings, here, jump in a crane. Great picture, okay, a self jumper right there, okay. We do this all the time. Sempra's gonna do it again, right?
Yep.
Yep, that north crane on Sempra, the west crane on Sempra, gonna jump again, okay? When they're jumping, this is a very dangerous, yet very safe operation.